Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Coffee with Colleen. Thanks for joining the Clallam County EDC session. Colleen is currently flying to British Columbia, so I will be hosting the chat today. We really appreciate you all joining this morning. We're fortunate enough to have Bernard Bormann join us as a guest this morning. Bernard has several titles, including the director of the Olympic National Resources Center in Forks. He's a professor at the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences, the College of Environment, University of Washington. Bernard, if I butchered any of that, feel free to let me know. But just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure to keep yourself on mute so you don't pick up unintentional background noise. And then we do like to keep the chat overall pretty interactive. So if you have any questions throughout, either put them in the chat and I'll read them out, or raise your hand and I'll call on you. Without further ado, Bernard has prepared an exciting presentation for us. So Bernard, please take it away.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. Yeah, I'm delighted to talk to you guys about the Olympic Natural Resources Center in Forks. I've got a presentation I want to go through. Hopefully we'll have time for some questions at the end. Are you seeing my presentation?
I am, but it's the full view with your notes.
Okay, let me switch displays.
There you go. That looks good.
There we go. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know about the Olympic Natural Resources Center. We're up the hill from the Forks Airport. Everybody's welcome to stop by. It's a facility of the University of Washington. This ONRC was created by the Washington legislature in 1989 with the help of U.S. Representative Norm Dix and others. It opened in 1995. We have the undaunting task of solving controversies about forestry and marine resources by applying the expertise of what we can from the University of Washington in rural Washington. And this was set up as a kind of a statewide test, but located on the Olympic Peninsula. It's a pretty unique institution, and one I'm taking great care to keep going. I showed up here in 2015 after a career with the Forest Service Research Branch, and first thing I did coming here was to try to reframe the debate, which had previously been mostly about economics versus preservation, or integrating those two ideas to a broader framework, which we call ecosystem sustainability. And everything we do at ONRC kind of comes back to this framework. And what we argue is that community well-being and environment well-being are equally important and need to be on the table at the same time, that the two are intertwined, can't be separated, and we need to be looking at the whole, this ecosystem as a whole to make progress. How to achieve this is no easy matter, but we've, over the last 8 years or so, developed an approach we call learning-based collaboration, which you will see expressed in some of the things I talk about. We have both a forestry and a marine program, and I'm going to just briefly talk about our marine program and its signature effort called the Olympic Region Harmful Algae Partnership, or ORHAB, first. Just so very quickly, you all know, there are phytoplankton, a few of which contain toxins if consumed by shellfish, and subsequently consumed by us, we can get very sick. We're focused on the outer coast, razor clam fishery primarily, and we've done some studies, including one of the 2015 bloom, where it was estimated $150 million of loss occurred due to the Dungeness crab and razor clam
Wow.
fishery. So there's, but also other indirect and environmental effects, including marine mammals and seabirds. So this partnership is a strong one. It's led by us, but it involves the Outer Coast tribes and various state and federal agencies.
Where are we leaving? As soon as you're ready.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. So what we get funded partly from the license fees. We get part of the license fees, and what we do with that funding is to try to provide an early warning system. So we have people in the partnership all up and down the coast collecting plankton in the water, looking for these phytoplankton, testing for toxins, and reporting to the Department of Health and Fish and Wildlife, who set clam openings. So we work, as I said, all up and down the coast, and we've been doing this since 2000. It's one of the longest running monitoring programs of its kind, and it's been replicated in quite a few other parts of the West Coast and other areas as well. So let me turn next to our signature forestry program, which we call the T3 Watershed Experiment. T3 stands for Type 3. It's a particular size of the watershed that contain fish. And this is a very strong partnership between University of Washington and Department of Natural Resources. We've had some coverage in the media. We're always looking for more, but it has the potential to attract some attention. This partnership is even broader. It includes, as I said, UW, ONRC, and DNR, particularly the Olympic Experimental State Forest Office of DNR. We involve managers from the DNR, including the Olympic region, Forest Service as well. 3 tribes are part of it who've approved this effort in tribal council. We have a wide range of researchers who have come to us because they're interested in our work, from UW, Oregon State, the Forest Service Research Station as well. We work with elected officials, commissioners. I see Randy on the list there. We've talked about this on a number of occasions. We work closely with various environmental and industry groups, including OFCO, AFRC, that's American Forest Resource Council, Washington Environmental Council, and others. And quite a few private residents are involved as stakeholders as well. We pose a rather obscure question, I suppose. Will a higher sustainable level of ecosystem well-being emerge from an array of land management strategies that are implemented and compared experimentally? Fortunately, we have some stakeholders who can translate that for others, and they just said, well, why don't you just say, can we expand DNR's silvicultural toolbox? So that's kind of the goal of this project. It's located on the outer Olympic Peninsula, and the reddish areas are the DNR trust lands. And this is a big block which allowed us to find 16 watersheds located within this area. So covering 20,000 acres that have been dedicated to this study. And these were separated into 4 similar blocks, and then treatments were randomly assigned. This is a full experimental design with 4 different management strategies. which I will explain in a second. So far, this is being implemented now. It's the active land management is occurring on over 2,000 acres, and it's generating something like $16 million in revenue for the trusts. The four strategies we're comparing are, first of all, the as a control, sort of, is the current DNR management practices, the current toolbox. This toolbox consists primarily of short rotation Douglas fir with some retention of 8 trees per acre of residual trees, occasionally some species other than Douglas fir, but primarily Douglas fir. There are some areas where they have been doing a light commercial thinning. And you have to say there are also set-asides, for murrelets and other things with no active management, which we're also doing in watersheds, in the no-action control watersheds. And we really want to compare this to some new approaches that have not been widely practiced to explore the extent that this toolbox can be expanded. And we have a number of different treatments. I don't have time to go over all of them, so I'm going to just talk about 3 of them and show you a couple pictures. So this is the accelerated variable density thinning treatment that was put in last winter. It involves, this is one of 4 units across the area. It involves thinning much more widely, taking out more trees, leaving fewer residuals, and also leaving some rather large gaps as well. So the idea behind this prescription is to speed the development of late seral structure. If this is chosen to be converted to late seral habitat later, or it could be completely harvested at year 70 and we could start over. It increases near-term net revenue compared to the lighter thinnings that occur, and it's quite a bit of difference there because it's expensive to get the equipment out there to do the work, and the more trees you harvest, the higher net revenue. We also believe this approach will sequester more carbon than the standard 40-year rotations. It's something we want to test. This second one is really new, and it's called variable density planting. And so standard practice for DNR is to plant on a very uniform approximately 11-foot spacing. So the trees are evenly placed out across the landscape, and at about 350 trees per acre. Because of an interest from various folks about early seral vegetation, about forage for deer and elk, we thought that it would be appropriate to see if we can clump the plantings, where we can achieve the same or close to the same amount of wood production, but in a kind of extend this non-conifer vegetation in between the clumps for a longer period of time. And this is kind of in nature, we see more clumping than uniformity. So it's also a way to move things back toward a more natural successional pattern. And so we're basically looking at new ways to integrate these ecological and wood production objectives. Third one I want to mention is a riparian treatment. So while on the experimental state forest, they have some leeway to manage in the riparian zones, they tend not to do so. So here we're starting, and it's important to know that most of these units we're working with were harvested in the 70s and 80s. And when they harvested it, these areas, they took everything. There was no riparian reserve at that time, and they planted it to conifers, and it's come back to dense conifer on most of the riparian zones that we're working with. And so the policy that's effectively in place is not to do any harvesting, which is perhaps somewhat different than natural successional patterns. So here, the idea is to thin in the riparian zone very widely, wide enough to grow rotations of red alder, right up next to the stream. And the benefits of doing this approach are to, first of all, increase the land base. So having more active management in the riparian zone will do that. We also have good reason to believe and are studying the potential benefits of deciduous litter, in particular alder, on the food chain. The leaves are more decomposable. They fall into the stream or are consumed by invertebrate insects that are eaten by fish. And secondly, by thinning widely, we can grow much larger conifer trees faster, and those are quite important if they, for in-stream wood effects. So that's an example of three of the novel treatments we're looking at. When we combine all of them, all of what we're doing, which is pretty complicated across these 16 watersheds, at the landscape level, we're thinking about resiliency, in particular to support this ecosystem well-being concept. So we're diversifying DNR's management in 20,000 acres. And if these treatments are adopted elsewhere in DNR, diversification will spread across the ownership. We're concerned in particular about this early seral vegetation in support of certain kinds of wildlife, deer, elk, insects, certain birds, which we are also studying. But we're also interested in diversifying the species of wood that are of trees that are being harvested to support different kinds of mills and economic activities.
Bernard, is this the first T3 Watershed Experiment of its kind?
This is the T3 Watershed Experiment as it's being implemented right now.
And is it the first of its kind?
This is one of the largest forestry experiments in the country. You may have heard of the OSU has been trying to do something similar to this down in Oregon, and they've actually failed to make it happen. We've succeeded in, so it is one of absolutely the biggest in the country.
Great, thank you.
We think that, particularly by involving stakeholders and tribes and others in the design of the study, that and keeping them involved in the evaluation of the study, we're increasing public support for active management. And we're also increasing the chances that managers will adopt these, because we're doing this experiment at an operational scale, principally. So they can see for themselves the pluses and minuses as they unfold. I guess I'd like to make the point that this experimentation is a way to diversify and learn at the same time. And it's really critical that we think about the facilitation of future innovation and diversification. So we're going to learn some things. Some things are not going to go well, but some things are going to surprise us and do well. And so it'll help us to evolve over time. Now, of course, none of this is going to be, we're not going to learn if we don't monitor. So we have a robust monitoring program, funded with largely from our funding from the state legislature. And I won't go through all of these in detail, but I will say we have a very interesting remote sensing program with some cutting edge work with drone LiDAR and multispectral imagery and acoustic bird surveys. So we're actually, most of our publications to date are about these developments of remote sensing. Now, all of this activity I've been talking about, I just want to point out, including the ORHAB, provides jobs. So when we think about jobs, don't forget about monitoring and R&D, because there are quite a few jobs on the peninsula associated with this activity that wouldn't exist otherwise. I will say one of the ways we're trying to extend participation is we have a program we call learning groups. And these are kind of self-formed groups of stakeholders and others who come together to discuss particular topics of interest to them. We have a history, cedar, carbon, invasive plants, tribal. We started in economics one, and it's kind of petered out. I'm sort of interested in talking to all of you about perhaps maybe there's a way you might be interested in helping us get that learning group up and running. These generally involve discussions or meetings about every 2 months. A number of these groups have written grant proposals and have designed some small-scale studies, one on ways to reduce browse damage to cedar, another to look at reducing Scotch broom ingrowth.
Bernard, I had Rod Fleck from the City of Forks is raising his hand. Do you mind if he asks a question?
Sure, I'd love to get a question from Rod.
Hey, good morning, Bernard. Actually, what I wanted to do is ask you the 2 questions that were popped up. And one was Sharon Ann asked, what is early and late cereal? And then the other one is by Michael Maxwell, and he's asking, what is a time frame for getting actionable data? And so before you went too further, I wanted to make sure you got those 2 questions.
Good questions. So early and late cereal, I'm sorry, we talk to each other too much. So the natural succession is the concept of after the forest is disturbed or destroyed by fire or wind, there's a natural sequence of vegetation and stand conditions that develops over time, leading in some areas to what we call old growth or late successional forests. Early cereal forests is a really important stage to help the stand recuperate from the disturbance. It involves often a lot of deciduous shrubs and trees like alder, and eventually the conifers grow through this, and often takes 30-40 years in a lot of forests before you see a normal conifer stand during a natural succession sequence. Forest management, where we come in and cut the trees down, spray herbicides, plant conifers at a dense spacing, really truncates that stage. And there's a number of animals that are adapted to that stage who are in considerable decline, and birds and insects and others. And also the national forests focus on late cereal and lack of harvesting on national forests also is contributing to it's actually an important environmental concern amongst the scientists principally, but hopefully that helps answer that question. In terms of time frame, so we're growing forests. Forests take a lot of time to grow, but we can learn a lot of things as they grow. We're learning how to monitor them. We're learning how to. We're looking at the kind of early stages of planting, regeneration, forage production, birds and insects, all of that. So there's a lot can be learned along the way. So hopefully that answers those questions. the last bit I wanted to talk about is where we think we're headed in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. And this is hopefully we have put together a major grant proposal to the Paul Allen Family Foundation, and are proposing some important work with the Olympic National Forest. And I wanted to share this with you to show you kind of where we're hoping to go, and talk a little bit about fire, which is a natural outcome of this. So the foundation is put out a lot of money in the Northwest, $5 million for natural climate solutions. What they're hoping we can do is figure out ways to increase carbon sequestration through active management. They emphasize that they're not talking about carbon parks. They want to talk about maintaining wood production. They want to also a fuller array of what they call co-benefits of various kinds. And thank you guys for the letter that you helped, that you added to our proposal. So what we have proposed to do, and we should hear any day whether we got this grant. First of all, is to kind of do some projections of these novel treatments that we've developed and that others have developed, and project them across Western Washington and Oregon to kind of look at what the impact would be if these were more widely adopted. Now, I'm not going to talk about that part of it because it's way too complicated, but I want to bring up this effort to apply our learning-based collaboration model on the Olympic National Forest. So the Olympic National Forest has a supervisor, Kelly Lawrence, who is extremely interested and has come to us to see if we can help them implement what will be their main focus for the next 5 years or so on the Jimmy Come Lately project, as they're calling it. The forest has a kind of a new approach, and you look to their webpage, you can see it's very, very aligned with what we're talking about. The objectives for this project will, of course, include late seral habitat and old growth and so forth, as mandated by the Northwest Forest Plan. But they hope to be producing wood, sequestering carbon, fixing fish habitat, meeting tribal needs better. And we've been suggesting they need to think about a learning effort as well as fire. And I'm going to talk about fire because I started to explore the fire history and have come up with some really fascinating results that will presumably be considered in this proposal. And I think you ought to be aware of these as well. So I started by looking at the 4 townships surrounding this proposed project area just south of Squim Bay. And if you don't know what a township is, it's this area here, and I'll get into that in a minute. But this area goes from this is the Forest Service boundary. There's some DNR inholdings, Mount Zion in the south, Blue Mountain is further to the left. So there's four sources of evidence that I've been able to uncover to address this so far. The Government Land Office records, a map, some photos and current conditions. Let me go with the Government Land Office records first. For those of you, most people I think know this, but a township consists of 36 sections. And this system was developed by Thomas Jefferson. It's your property boundaries are linked to these section corners. And when they went out to lay them out, they basically started from a known survey point, and they went, in this case, west 40 chains or half a mile, set up a marker. And whenever they set up a marker, they had witness trees. So in this case, 2, and they just described the species in diameter. And then they went on to the next section corner and did 4 trees. So this is an interesting source of data. We have in this area data starting in 1858. Here's I don't know if you can read this, but here's the actual notes themselves, or the record from 1858. And this is this particular section line that I just showed you. They ran this half mile, found a fir and a cedar, both 15 inches in diameter. They went on to the section corner, found 3 cedars and a fir. And at the end of each mile hike, they wrote some notes about what they saw. And in this case is described as timber, fir, cedar, and hemlock, part burnt and much fallen. So that described, and that was said on every one of these section lines along the north end of this township. And now we turn to the 1891 survey, where they went in and did all the sections, or most of the sections. When they were through doing all their work, they described the whole township. So this is the township just south of Squim Bay. And it says nearly all of the timber has been killed by forest fire, having only a small amount of scattering of fir and cedar. Other parts of this booklet, there's they suggested that there had been a large fire in 1881, 10 years earlier. So we have some pretty good idea. If you go through and pull out all these numbers, which is no easy task, this is the data that emerges. You're looking at the colors of these boxes are the tree species. Light green is fir, orangish brown is cedar, and dark green is hemlock. And the numbers are the diameters of the trees that they measured. There was a lot of, and this green area is where the project is being laid out on Forest Service. This is Squim Bay in the upper right. So if you interpret the data here, clear, extensive evidence of fire across the 4 townships, not just this one. The diameters of the trees are remarkably small. We see nothing that looks anything remotely like an old growth stand. There's a few large cedars here and there. Many snags. The hatch marks are dead trees that are snags. So we can see, obviously a huge influence of fire. The next evidence pool is this map produced in 1909 called the Forest Atlas. They did this mapping right after the National Forest was created. And in this area, it's unbelievable. One of the most common mapped units is described as burnt, not restocking. Not restocking means they did not see many conifer seedlings. So bare ground, or shrubs, hardwoods, perhaps, we're not sure. So the third are these panoramic lookout photos, which were taken in 1935. There's a whole network of lookouts on the Olympic National Forest, which was considerably larger at the time. And these upper 3 in the upper right are the ones I'm going to show you. It was they went there with this fancy camera that could take panoramic shots, and it produced these prints and negatives, which reside at the National Archives over in Seattle, which we're going to go try to kind of scan at higher density. And this is the hill above Squim Bay. It's called a Blend Lookout. There was a lookout. It's no longer there. But this is the picture from 1935. And the white stuff you're seeing, it's a kind of an infrared film. So this is actually the hardwoods. Conifers are darker. There's a lot of snags, not a lot of trees, not a lot of big stumps. No indication that there was kind of old growth stand here anytime within the last couple hundred years at least. And this is 360, so looking straight south. I don't know where Mount Zion is because we're going to go that next, but it's probably in this area here. You get to Mount Zion and you look north, you can still see Swim Bay. And there is one really nice patch of surviving trees, but the bulk of the landscape, the trees have been burned. And there, again, no large stumps. It's looking south. This actually extends all the way down Hood Canal around the south end of the Olympics and across the north end of the Olympics as well. This is if you were around in 1935, this is a very different place than it is today. Here's Ned Hill between Port Angeles and Swim. Again, same sort of story. Here we have a little bit older conifer vegetation coming back. This is what the stand looks like today. I was up there in May on the top of Blen Hill, and it's a very, very dense conifer stand, very uniform. Trees presumably are growing quite slowly because these soils have been very damaged by this fire history. And the fire history that we can put together with this evidence looks something like this. So even in 1858, there had been previous fires and blowdowns. We see patches of young conifer that then disappear, and we go to seedlings again, and they do it again. So there's at least 2 or 3 major fires that ran through since 1858. And you have to, looking at this, you have to ask the question, is this just waiting to burn again? So let's think about that. Going back to the township map, fires, love uniformity, and we have uniformity over most of this area. There are some DNR harvests that occurred on these inholdings. And with the climate change that's occurring, you look at the Labor Day fires in Western Oregon and all the fires that are burning today. This is definitely a fire risk area, and there are risks to residents and infrastructure nearby. There are also risks to whatever patches of older forest there are could be burned. It's certainly a risk to the strategy of growing late successional habitat on the national forest. There's also risks to the adjacent timber industry lands who have young conifer stands that could be lost in fire very easily as well. But with risks, there's also opportunities. I think this evidence would support some larger scale, more intensive management activity on the national forest to address these risks, and which would inevitably produce more timber than has been produced on the national forests and on the Olympic national forests in the last few decades. There's also opportunities if we get serious about reducing fuels and can find markets for feedstock for fuels. There's the opportunity with successfully reducing fire risk to increase carbon sequestration, which is also increased by thinning and soil remediation by the nitrogen fixing red alder. It's a fascinating issue that arose in our meeting with the Jamestown Slalom a couple weeks ago. The elk herd south of 101 is in terrible shape, and down to just a few males. I mean, it's a crazy, difficult situation, and trying to rebuild that herd would be an interesting objective as well. And then reintroduction of underburning. So tribal underburning, nobody seems to know anything about it in this area, but to the south in the Skokomish area, San Juans and even British Columbia, there's been extensive studies on how tribal entities had an extensive underburning program many centuries ago. And so we might think about looking at that, at restoring that as well. So that's my story. And I'll open it up and see if there's some questions.
Great. Thank you, Bernard. Great presentation. Super interesting. We're fortunate to have you out here. There was a few questions in the chat. One from Laurel asks, what's the scientific definition of old growth?
Well, I don't know what a scientific definition is, but there are many definitions out there. Generally, people go with a certain number. I think it's more than 10 trees per acre that are over 70 centimeters, 2 feet in diameter, 2.5 feet in diameter. So you need some large trees at a sufficient density. You typically also, there's a second story or 2 stories, of trees, taller ones and shorter ones, and some understory patches. But it's many people have many different definitions.
Okay. You referenced the Paul Allen Family Foundation that you recently applied for. I'm curious if there's ways to do good things for carbon while still managing and harvesting the forest and managing the forest for our economy as well. Is there a happy medium there, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's the question they're posing,
Right.
and we're searching for that answer.
So, to be determined.
We think there are. We do. We definitely think there definitely are. I mean, we've already seen some of them. And it's really going to be more about whether people are willing to implement them rather than whether they exist.
Got it. We have a question from John. He says, fantastic presentation. Thanks. Long-term being multiple decades for this research, how is the nonlinear potential effects of climate change it's blocked. Incorporating from none of this matter to a manageable level of climate change? How to incorporate the different assumptions?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainties, not just climate. And it's true that if climate does change substantially over the period of the experiment, it confounds the interpretation somewhat. But the value, I think, of what we're doing is we have an array of different treatments out there, and they will all be responding to the same climate shifts, and some of them will do better than others. We don't know which ones will do better than the others, but I think we will learn a lot, and that'll help us to make further adjustments as we go along.
Great. Randy Johnson has a question. Go ahead, Randy.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard, by the way. 2 different questions. One's fire, and as you know, this is political season, so I always relate to that. And all the individuals running for lands commissioner talked about managing for fire. So that's not exactly what you're relating to that in the study, but if you were the lands commissioner, how would you manage for fire?
Well, I think most people who talk about managing for fire in the state of Washington are thinking about eastern Washington and the eastern Cascades, and they're not thinking about western Washington for the most part. And that's a huge mistake, because fire is moving into we've seen this in Oregon. We've seen it historically, just in the fire history I just showed you. Western Washington, parts of Western Washington are very fire prone, and we are not addressing this risk well in Western Washington. And it's not an easy thing to address, but there are some things that we can do. For one, and I'm not going to try to talk about Eastern Washington, but in Western Washington, for example, we're seeing repeatedly now fires being influenced by the vegetation, in particular red alder. We have lots of evidence where these wildfires run up and hit a patch of alder and it drops out or dies out, and the alder acts to dampen the fire movement. We have a study on the Willamette where this happened very clearly, and studies on those Oregon fires showed that the fire goes out when it hits alder throughout all of Western Oregon. So there's some pretty strong evidence developing. So incorporating some alder into forest management, strategically thinking about fire is one thing. There's many other strategies that need to be contemplated, including, how to attack a fire once it started, preparing so you can set back fires strategically, along roads, thinking about ridge roads in particular. There's a host of things that need to be looked into in Western Washington.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'm going to flip to a whole different question, Mitch, if you'll let me, and Bernard. Yes. We've had multitudes of questions about water quantity and quality relative to harvest, and you obviously have some research results related to that. Would you mind just sharing those for those of us that are not scientists?
Okay, so first of all, it's hard to, so when you study these things at the watershed scale that we are doing, which is 500 to 2,000 acres, first thing the hydrologists tell us is that you're not going to see hardly any effect on water, because you are managing, in the case of DNR, it's 10% of the watershed over a decade. That's their allowable harvest limit. And we went to them saying, we want to study water. And they said, well, we're not going to help you because you need to harvest at least 20% of the watershed before we'll even detect anything. And so we abandoned the hydrologists and didn't build, flumes to collect water or anything, because they are telling us there's no way we're going to get an effect. Now we can have some localized effects along reaches, and we are studying those. But at the larger scale, it's hard to influence water without, harvesting a large portion of the watershed. So what Randy's talking about is trees transpire water when they grow. So they take water up. They kind of have the potential to reduce water flow, but they also mediate and help reduce peak flows. It's a complex arrangement. So there are I think some water quality issues that are also relevant as well. But we're not too concerned about water, frankly, because we're not harvesting enough of the landscape to have an effect.
Thank you.
Rod Fleck, did you have a question?
I did, Bernard. You had made one comment about your presentation on T3, and it was the question that was whether or not the discoveries or the seen economic, ecological, or social benefits would be implemented. So I'm kind of curious what you see as potential barriers that would prevent implementation. But before you leave the fire study, just want to say that was really fascinating to see the weaving of the history into that presentation. And that one stand you showed seemed very much to me a stem exclusion stand similar to a Klahani Ridge. And what does that type of a stand do with regard to ecological benefits to flora, fauna, fish that are of concern?
Yeah, taking that last one first. These are definitely stem exclusion, very, very dark, almost no understory. some scattered rhododendron, which suggests the soil was damaged. That supports, very little food for deer and elk, almost none. There are certain species that may be adapted to those, but they're very few in number. So yeah, there's having those dense stands has a negative effect on a lot of wildlife, and getting them opening up can provide rapid benefit. In terms of I think your question is might stand in the way of DNR implementing some of the treatments we're studying. The first I guess bottleneck is DNR just hasn't been trying new things. I mean, we've gone 30 years since, and their toolbox has not changed. And so they like doing what they do. They're efficient at it. They're very good at it. And trying new things is work, and they aren't set up to try new things. And so we're trying to help them to try new things. And so I think just simply trying them, at this operational scale will open their eyes to, what's workable, what's not workable. There may still be some resistance because in some cases there may be some smaller reductions in revenue. And there'll be trade-offs. Is that small reduction in revenue for the trusts providing benefits that would, overcome that deficit? It's also possible that, it may, alter their allowable harvest calculation. There's a whole host of possible avenues that could affect the total revenue. And some of them they're not going to want to do at all because they're going to be too expensive. It's maybe too hard to plant trees in this kind of odd clump pattern. But we'll have to wait and see.
Great. Looks like we had one more question in the chat from Rebecca. She asked, what kind of jobs will be needed as the programs grow? If people want to acquire these jobs, what type of education and or skills are needed?
Well, we have a pretty robust monitoring program going between DNR and UW. I don't know, we have probably 20 people out in the woods today doing monitoring on the T3 project alone. If this spreads to the Forest Service, then there'll be a lot of monitoring that is necessary to go along with this. We train our undergraduate. We have mostly undergraduates who we take on to train and have them do work for us, or people with bachelor's degrees. We've got a number of graduate students involved doing, leading some of these efforts. So yeah, I mean, just a forestry education is all you really need. And we've been talking about maybe working with veterans to see if we could get a crew of veterans trained to do some of this monitoring activity, which would be, I think, an interesting. There seems to be a lot of interest on their part. That's one of our key stakeholder groups.
Great. How many employees do you have total at the Olympic Natural Resource Center?
Well, we've got about, 6 or 7 full-time permanent employees, and quite a few, as I said, summer employees as well.
Great. Is there any other questions from, we do have one from John. How is the alder tree integration being accepted for fire prevention?
It's it's not anywhere near as accepted as it should be. Now, this has been known. I had a slide of a study we did down on Wind River, which is down in the Columbia Gorge. And it was in 1934, after the Yakult burn had reburned an area, a large area in southwest, it's in southern Washington. The forester came up with this idea of interplanting alder between the Douglas fir, and he did a mile-long strip from the stream up over a ridge, over another stream, and in 1934. And so the alders and the Doug fir grew together, and it's been studied off and on by many different people. And we went back and remeasured it a couple years ago, and there's currently in the stand, which no longer has any alder because they all died out a number of years ago, there's 3 times as much volume and biomass of Douglas fir where the alder was, because the alder remediated the soil. It's a nitrogen fixer. It brought back nitrogen to the soil, and it also, a lot of people don't understand this, it increased the soil organic matter content and the water holding capacity of these soils by a similar margin to nitrogen. And it just created vast amounts, hugely different. In this strip, you can look at it on Google Earth, and it just is this long strip that stands out. Yet, I was down on the Willamette after the Labor Day fires on the Weyerhaeuser tree farm, and Weyerhaeuser is simply planting wall-to-wall Douglas fir, no alder, no nothing. So, and they're losing money because they're not considering the soil effects that occurred with the fire, and they don't know it. So it's not being widely considered. It should be.
All right, well, it is 8:59. Bernard, excellent presentation. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thankful to have you here doing this work. Couple EDC events coming up. We have our Lefties EDC membership game tonight. We hope to see some of you there. It's at 5:30. The link is in the chat if you want to register. And then we also have our Women in Business event coming up on August 13th. The topic is creating incredible futures, resources, and support for women in business. Besides that, I hope everybody enjoys their Wednesday, and thank you again, Bernard.
Thank you.